Evan Culp back at you, continuing our podcast on managing security features within SuperCloud Composer. In the previous video clip, we talked about multi-AD support and how a particular user logs into an Active Directory domain. Today's video clip is going to focus on another security tool set that we bolted into this SuperCloud Composer platform called identity providers. And the example of an identity provider is Keycloak. So we're going to focus on Keycloak integration. But before I get started in navigating into the platform and showing you how to create and configure an identity provider, I want to talk about the relationship that exists here between the client and the server. As in the previous video, we explained the relationship between the AD server sending an enterprise management network where users would essentially use this platform to authenticate, very much like Keycloak. It is a server or middleware that sits on an enterprise network that is utilized for clients or users to come in and credential against so that they get access to specific assets within an enterprise network. And assets could be applications, could be servers, so on and so forth. So what's important to note here is that when we talk about identity providers, it's really about a service that's being offered in the enterprise and is a token provider. That's the key mechanism there. So tokens are basically passed to the client, and then the client either accepts them or based on the client being the user, we would establish that handshake or communication between the identity provider and the client. And the client being basically SuperCloud Composer, and then also users that are client IDs that get associated with SuperCloud Composer. So in a nutshell, that's basically how the tool set works. And so we're now going to navigate into the platform and understand how we configure this SSO configuration for single sign-on within SuperCloud Composer. So we're going to log in as global admin, and global admin is local user. So remember that these accounts are stored within SuperCloud Composer's architecture, and that's what's different about an AD domain realm and also an identity provider realm. That in local user access, we basically store the accounts specific to the architecture of SuperCloud Composer. So we did some testing early on to show you to make sure that this is working prior to getting in. You can see here that we're seeing activity timelines to indicate that when we send a test message out to touch this particular identity provider, it gets tracked within the activity timeline to the right here where my mouse is. So let's start by navigating into the identity provider, and how we do that is by going down and selecting the admin menu option. And you'll notice here on the left-hand side here on the pull-out sidecar menu, we are logged in as global admin. And so global admin is super user, which is a credentialed account. And that's why we see all the menu options here. Depending on how you get a user associated with a role-based access control, different menu options would appear. And maybe you would not see all these menu options depending on what role that you're participating in the data center. So the other aspect of this is when we got into the login of the splash screen or the landing page, we were taken or navigated directly to the global dashboard. And all users that log in have read access to this so that they can get a better understanding of the dashboard itself, right? As far as what's happening within their data center, what's happening from a standpoint of collection of sensor data. So So we're off to the admin page here, and let's just pull this down here and get it out of the way. And then we want to click on the security option, which is where we would see our LDAP configuration, which we talked about earlier, about remember setting global settings there, um, and also Active Directory. And then we also use the drop-down menu for identity providers, and you see here KeyCloak. So let's launch KeyCloak. And then you can see here within the configuration, we already have some client setup or user setup in the element list here, shows you the information here. And we'll get into what each of these fields means in a few moments. But let's click on the plus option, which is we're going to create and establish an element or in the element list initially at first within the SSO configuration. So we're going to provide a display name here that might be pertinent of how a particular user or application is being set up for that trust connection. We are going to plug in the server URL, and that is really your identity provider's IP address with its port, the realm which is configured on your KeyCloak server. So we may be connecting into different realms depending on what user access is for a specific asset or application or server. And then the client ID, right? The client ID is the username and then also the configuration status. So you want to make sure that this is actually enabled and not disabled. So if it's disabled, of course, you're not going to be able to communicate effectively to that KeyCloak server that exists on your enterprise network. So if you wanted to add additional elements into the element list here, you would click on the add button here, and then they would show up and continue to appear in the order in which you added them. And then once you're satisfied with adding all those entries or elements, then you would just simply click the save button, and then they would appear in this element list. So Vincent dash test is one of those. If we click here and we want to test the connection, so we want to go tap the identity provider or server on the shoulder, or basically tap it and see if it's going to respond, we can simply send a test message to it. And at that point, once we send a test message, it comes back with a result of success, which indicates we were successfully able to hit that identity provider and go ahead and accept the token in which it's provided us. So if we went ahead and initiated this particular test and the result was error, maybe perhaps we have a configuration issue on the KeyCloak server, perhaps their IP reachability problem. There's all kinds of situations, obviously, that would result in an error. We show a reason here on the right-hand side, which is important, and you can drill down and understand why the connection failed based on a reason and doing some troubleshooting to determine that. So we'll close out that, and the next thing we're going to do is click on Vincent, and we want to edit information. Maybe there's some reason you want to disable it. Maybe you want to lock out specifically this client, or not give access, that trusted connection to that application or server for some type of reason, right? So we would basically disable it. And then, none of those tokens would be passed between the client being ourselves, a SuperCloud Composer, and the server being the KeyCloak identity provider that exists on your enterprise network. We could also delete information here. And of course, we prompt you for, are you sure you want to do this before you delete it? So you wouldn't shoot yourself in the foot here, given the fact that we have plenty of ways to back out of that if we're not want to delete it and we click on it by mistake. So we'll exit that by just hitting the X button. And then on the right-hand side here, we have the reload option, which basically refreshes the list here. And then also the display option, right? And we talked about this where we've taken this same initiative across the entire platform of SuperCloud Composer when we build tables to allow you to either collapse or uncollapse the table. In this case, they're grayed out because we believe that the metadata or fields that are presented in the element list are important to you. So we basically went ahead and grayed them out. If you were looking at the compute list, there are some of those default options we have there that we feel are useful to you to be able to show that information in a table format. And if you wanted to collapse that table, then you can uncheck those and the table would basically collapse or uncollapse depending on how you're clicking and unclicking or checking and unchecking options there or features within the table. The other option is this list could get very large. So in that case, we have a search button here to filter out the table list. And you can search on any one of these options here, fields, and it would provide you the necessary information to reduce the number of elements in the table, which will be important because this element list could grow very large dependent on how many key cloak configurations that you need to configure within the. That's on a nutshell the configuration of KeyCloak. Very, very simple, straightforward. Not a lot of complexity there for you to, as a DevOps administrator, to configure. So we're going to essentially log out here, and we'll show you by logging out how you would actually log into an identity provider. You simply click on the sign on option, and then here you use the drop down for Vincent test. As you remember, you put in your username, which is the client ID you set up within the configuration, and the password, and away you go. And you're able to authenticate against the KeyCloak provider and be able to provide single sign on, which the essentially the identity provider would relay to an application and pass those tokens appropriately as needed. So that's how you would basically authenticate against a realm associated with identity provider. Nothing changes there, even with Active Directory. You'll connect to the Active Directory domain or realm and then be able to log in that way. So we're going to provide in the future a very nifty kind of dashboard here or landing page where we're going to break down and show you here's all the identity provider information and here's all AD so that you don't get confused when trying to log in. Remember though, right, when you're logging in, local access, right, is basically accounts that are stored internally within SuperCloud Composer. So that's kind of your backdoor into the platform, right? So if your identity Active Directory or identity provider was circumvented or was down, we don't lock you out of the platform, the management platform. That would be a bad thing, right? So we provide you a mechanism to get into the back door, given the fact is that those services are not available on your network. So that concludes this series of videos and podcasts on managing security features within SuperCloud Composer. Thanks for joining. Have a great day today, and we'll see you next time.